What is up, everyone? Welcome to the fourth episode of No One's a Critic, a podcast between myself, Pierre Kino, and Macabre Storytelling. How you doing this week, Mac?
Not too bad. We kind of were almost didn't record this week because I spoke to you a few days ago. I had caught COVID, and I was pretty sick. I'm vaccinated, but I got basically like, and this is sort of how I always get sick. I'll get really, really sick for like 36 hours, and then my fever will break, and then I'll be fine. So yeah, just that like 36 hours were a bit pretty bad. They were pretty hell, but
Yeah.
now I'm good to go.
No, it's rough. I got really sick a couple months ago, and I thought it was COVID because I went to like a basketball game, and I wore my mask most of the time, but I just figured, being there in that environment, I got it because it was a rough I agree with you, like 36 hours. And then for the rest of the week, too, I was also like very lethargic, just didn't have any energy. And I thought it was COVID, but then I went and got a test from the store and it was negative. So I think it was just the flu, which, we kind of forget is still around, Whenever you get sick, you automatically assume it's COVID. But I definitely know being sick is not fun at all.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think my girlfriend got it too, and yet I think we got it at different, like we got it like right around the same time, but from different places.
Yeah.
Because the timelines didn't match up. It was sort of it worked out well. I mean, if we both get it,
Yeah.
you might as well. But bit of a pain in the ass. But
Yeah, well, we're all glad you're still around and still being able to record your content here, and I I'm excited to talk to you about this episode because I think it's something that is a little bit different from our normal shtick. We typically do reviews and talk about culture and stuff, but this is something that's a little bit more general to the world, which is we're talking today about companies and their ideologies, and even questioning, do they have them at all? I'll turn it over to you here first. I want to hear your thoughts about what do you think about companies, um, you know, sending a message that they believe in a certain thing or they have a certain ideology? What does that mean to you?
well, so I kind of defer to as sort of like a personal example. I had a situation where it was during. So I live in Chicago, where Pride is a huge thing. We have Boys Town, and my ex roommate and his boyfriend, I was talking to them about, you know, um, during Pride Month, it's like, what didn't Skittles do something like
Yeah,
all white M&M? Like that was the funniest thing ever. But anyways, so you have all these companies coming out in support of gay pride and or donating money, and it was interesting because my ex roommate and his boyfriend, they had two different perspectives on it. My ex roommate, he basically was sort of like, he kind of felt insulted by like, it is kind of insulting when you have all these companies sort of stating they fight for these causes and they support them, but then when you actually look at their policies and whatnot, you see a lot of they're profit driven, so they don't care about when push comes to shove, they don't care about any of that stuff. But on the other hand, his boyfriend said, "Well, I don't trust these companies. I don't think that they actually care. Like, again, if push comes to shove, they'll do what makes the money. However, if we're able to leverage them to get donations or support of some kind, and it's having a positive effect on the community, um, well, that's a win regardless of intent." And I sort of that's always been something I've mulled over because I feel sort of torn in the sense that like it does feel very condescending. It feels very, virtue signaling, as they say. But on the other hand, it's like, well, if it's still having some good effect, if it's still having some positives, should we just bite the bullet? We don't have to like, pat them on the back or anything, but just sort of take what they give, I guess.
yeah, it's interesting. So there's different ways companies kind of approach this issue, right? There's some of them who are just like, yeah, we'll tweet out, a rainbow during Pride Month and whatever, but there's no like meat behind it. It's just like we'll get some retweets and whatever. It doesn't cost us anything. And that's the part I think that really pisses people off when it's really phony. Um, Kind of relating it back to film, like we talked about before, it's just them kind of chasing trends rather than it coming from like a real meaningful place. And I think that's what angers a lot of people. I work in tech, and there are companies that definitely have values. I'd say they're all profit driven. They all care about money, but because of like companies are made up of workers, right? And so if the workers are all part of a specific culture, that does tend to influence the company in the sense that they don't want to uh, piss off their employees because they don't want them leaving or they don't want them talking bad about them, and so out of necessity, out of a profit mindset, they do adopt certain things. And you're right, there's companies that will like donate to certain causes or support their employees in certain ways, um, and that can like that person said, that can be a real benefit to that group. It doesn't really matter what the intention was. If you donate money just because it makes you feel good about yourself, right? Even if you don't care about the people, you still gave them money, right? It still helps those causes. So um I think there's two ways companies can approach it, and the way they do so influences kind of how we see their motives.
hmm And you brought up something interesting because this is something we've talked about in the past, or with some friends of mine. Not to get too off track, but sort of, is there ever such thing as a selfless act? In the sense of, hey, if you donate money to a charity, or offer your support to a cause, or work at a food shelter or something like that. Um, Obviously, you are doing good, but if you're only doing it to sort of like make yourself feel better or feel good about yourself, or kind of like flex, it's like, does that make it a selfless act? Does that make you a worse person? And it's I I don't know. It's like, I guess, like, we as humans, human nature is that there might always be some sort of underlying, you know,
Yeah.
if I see an old lady struggling across the street, my sort of instinct might be to help her. But is that because maybe, like, in the back of my
Yeah.
head, I want to look good? Maybe. But then again, if the result is the same, does it matter? I
I
don't know.
I think it matters at a certain point. There's like a threshold, and we can argue over what it is, right? Making yourself feel better, I don't think is a horrible thing to do, right? It's if you get benefit from it, who cares? It's a good thing that you feel good about yourself, and that's totally fine. On the other hand, right, there's like dirty kind of charity, I think.
hmm
I've seen like companies donate to a cause or whatever because it's like a political donation, right? It's like we're donating to this charity because the money is going to this politician, or it's going to fund this other thing that's going to secretly benefit us, and that feels dirty and that pisses people off.
Yeah.
So when you're getting like, and I understand, right? With any kind of like charitable work, there are ways to reap certain like tax benefits and stuff like that, and that's whatever. That's fine. That's how our system's set up. Um, but it feels gross when you're you're setting it up to people, right? Your public image is like, oh, we're doing this out of the goodness of our heart, but really we're reaping all these rewards out of it. And I think that's something that's particularly dirty. That's, by the way, also, if you ever go to like Target or Walmart or whatever, and they say like, do you want to donate money to this charity, they ask you at checkout or whatever. um, they benefit from that, by the way, because the money goes to those charities, but it goes through them, so they get the tax benefit off your money. You don't get that. You'd be better off just donating to those causes yourself. Again, there's an argument that they're facilitating it, right? They're getting your dollar from you or whatever, that you would never donate a dollar on your own. But
Yeah.
even still, they're reaping that secret benefit, make like saving millions on taxes off of your donation, basically, which again feels a little shady.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that's a good point of, like, yeah, if you're like donating to a charity that you later find out is the money isn't going to that charity, obviously, like, fuck those people, like, that's not good. You have to stop you should stop doing that. But in the case of, say, hey, this company donated, like, several $100 million to this charity, but they only did it so they can reap tax benefits.
Mhm.
Well, it on one hand, it's like, are they doing are they donating the money for sort of like a magnanimous or a selfless cause? Obviously, no. However, if we're able to leverage tax laws in a way that entices the company to do so, now they might still save money on their taxes, but if it's a net benefit for all in the end, like maybe they save $10 million on taxes, but 100 million still going to that charity. So do we kind of have to sort of are we kind of playing the game if we can sort of same thing with the like the example you made up with when you're at the supermarket. Are they sort of like setting up the charity stuff for like, hey, do you want to donate $1? Is that benefiting them? Yes. But as you said, is that actually getting donations that probably like most people aren't going to go to some charity on their website and donate $1 or $5, but maybe they're at the checkout counter. It's like, yeah, I'll give $1. So yeah, it might be making a difference. Again, we don't have to like, oh, thank you, Whole Foods.
Yeah, yeah.
You are our savior. We don't have to do that. We just kind of have to see it as all what is the if if the whole like end result is a net benefit, we should treat it as such and not get too bogged down in the details, I guess.
This gets even messier when we mix in churches into the mix here. Now,
Mhm.
I used to work with an organization that dealt with churches. And by the way, I'm not against churches. I'm not against religion. I think they serve a very important function in the community. And I have no problem with churches or religion or anything like that. But the problem I've seen in real life is there are churches with billions of dollars because churches, unlike a nonprofit, a church has almost no oversight when it comes to how and where they spend their money. Like nonprofits, they have to submit, like all what they spent their money on. There's a lot of government oversight for a nonprofit organization. Churches, there's a tiny little bit they have to do, but most of it they can spend it on whatever they want, and it's completely tax free. So you see these giant mega churches with billions of dollars who, again, some of them do work with that money. They do, soup kitchens, they do missions, they do whatever to help people or whatever. But they also do dirty stuff too. Not dirty, but like they do like we're gonna put on a huge Christian rock concert. We're gonna build this huge mega cathedral that can house 100,000 people. It's like a stadium, or we're gonna have these super events here. And at that point, to me, it really feels like this is like a corporation you have here, except there's no government oversight, there's no taxes here. And I'm not a fan of taxes or anything like that, but it's just like it seems weird to me that this thing that is being presented as like, oh, the reason churches don't have to pay taxes or have any oversight is because we're helping the communities. We're like a charity. We do all this stuff, and they absolutely do. There's a lot of churches that do great, incredible work. But when I again, just like corporations, right? I like small businesses. I trust small businesses, like a mom and pop shop. I trust small churches. But when I see these billion-dollar churches with all this money and they're doing all this like crazy extravagant stuff, I feel a little bit like Martin Luther, like nailing the the Reformation to the church door. It's like, yeah, you got a little bit too much there, pal. I don't think this is what it's all about here.
Well, I think that you point out what I think, and kind of turning this back to sort of everything we've gone over, whether it's like a movie studio promoting diversity or a company, saying, go Pride or Black Lives Matter or whatever, or a church, taking in money and, using it in not exactly like approved ways, I guess you could say. I think it all comes down to this sort of sense of hypocrisy that really, as humans, I think that is something that really bothers us. Even if something is being done, and even if it does have like a net benefit overall, if there's that sort of hint of it's that hint of hypocrisy that I think really gets at us. So like again with when I grew up, I went to a Protestant church in my hometown. It was a pretty big church, but and I'm not religious as of today. But when I used to go, the church was sort of, it was sort of like an old timey rundown sort of thing. You'd go in, the pews are kind of all old. Even the Bibles were kind of, worn and whatnot. However, and like call me a little bit, call me a little bit like, old fashioned or whatever, that always kind of sat right with me in the sense of like, yeah, that makes sense because even if a church does bring in a lot of money, it's going towards things that are actually trying to, you know, benefit their causes. They're not getting it's like, hey, look at these like new titanium pews we got or stuff like that. So you see, yeah, when I see like those like mega churches, it's again, like these churches might be doing stuff. They might be like, hey, we're making a bigger church so we can fit more people. I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess that's like towards going towards your end, what you say you preach. However, it always does come off as a little disingenuous because it sort of clashes with it's not about the money for us, it's about God and our religion. And yet also here's like my kick-ass Rolls Royce or something, or like here's like my mansion, like Joel Osteen, here's my mansion and like wherever. And then same thing with corporations, like kind of to bring this back to sort of because we're both into media. When it comes to you know how does it work when production companies promote diversity? And obviously it depends on how they do it. But sometimes I think it's not that a lot of people have a problem with diversity itself. The issue is one, what is the intention behind doing so? Are you actually for it? Or do you, like, for lack of a better term, do you just kind of want to suck your own dick a little bit? Do you just kind of want the brownie points? And I think that's where I'm a little bit upset that it usually gets focused at the diversity itself. Like people get mad at that. However, I do understand that people are sort of when they see like Disney, you know, hey guys, we're all about diversity. We're gonna have like the first open gay character, and then and like they hype it up so much and get all these like accolades for themselves, and then you see the movie, and like in Beauty and the Beast there was like LeFou, and at the end he's dancing with a guy. Like, look, we did it.
Mhm.
It comes up that's it's not the diversity, it's the fact that like it's the disingenuous nature of its implementation.
Yeah, it's interesting because like we mentioned before, I think companies can have genuine like, you know, ideological support for certain things because of their workers. Disney in particular, I've heard, is actually very gay friendly, like to their employees who work at the parks and all that kind of stuff. At least from what I've heard, it might not be true, but
Well, I think there's just I think right now there's a little bit controversy because I think that they support the Don't Say Gay bill, I believe. And a lot of workers are getting upset. Now I've read the bill. It's a bit more it's a bit more it's not as like cut and dry on I like both sides kind of are like it says this and it says this. The real issue with the bill is that it kind of is like it's so vague that it actually can lead to
yeah,
um it can lead to sort of like bad things,
yeah,
and that's what I would critique it as. But yeah, Disney's getting a lot of flack right now from I think even with employees
yeah,
because and going back to the hypocrisy thing, because a lot of employees have said, hey, in the past you've claimed to be for us, you've
yeah.
claimed to be for rights, and now it seems like you're going when it comes to making profits for yourself, now it seems like you're singing a different tune.
Well, that's the thing. I was again. Disney might be a bad example, or whatever, but I think there are companies that do genuinely support those things.
Mhm.
But one of the problems is it always comes at profit is the number one thing because that's just how corporations work, and specifically a lot of tech companies, right? They lean very much to the left because who are tech workers? They're very much left oriented people. That's who goes into this kind of field who make up these companies. Um, but one of the things about the left, of course, is it's not just a social issues that it supports, but like you know leftism is about higher taxes, about equality of income and all that kind of stuff. And tech companies are not about that at all. And that's where that hypocrisy comes from. Like, I don't, there's no billionaire CEO who supports paying higher taxes. They might say verbally to their employees or whatever that, like, yeah, we agree with all the, democratic views or whatever, but that's not at all, because no one wants to have less money. No one does. And that is really fake to me. That's the thing about tech that I've always been like, you're lying through your teeth here when you support. You might support, gay rights. You might support all this kind of stuff, but you absolutely do not support all the economics of the left ideology.
Yeah, what happens when push comes to shove? You could
Yeah,
say it, but time to play, when it comes time to play ball, what's going to happen? Um, you brought up an interesting point about, well, it's hard because I'm not a big fan of like major corporations and their practices. However, there is something to be said about, so let's say I am running a company, like a media company, and I'm genuinely trying to promote diversity in media, trying to get POC hired on different projects, more representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm legitimately trying to do good. What's difficult is, what sort of like is the game you have to play is that at the end of the day, in order to accomplish my mission, in order to try to do what I think is right, I do have to run my business as a business. I do have to make profit. If we don't have profit, we can't use that profit to help others. But what happens when making that profit on like a small turn, or like on a small scale, might go against your values, even though you're only doing that so you can make more profit and money, so you can push your, or try to accomplish your goal on a larger scale.
yeah.
And I think that's something that, because again, like you said, a lot of companies, even if they sincerely are for a lot of causes, they do engage in practices that probably on paper or practically go against those causes in maybe a smaller, not as major way, but they still do.
But the problem with that, like, thinking is that day never comes where you're like, profits don't matter. You make more money, you get more problems, right? Like, more money, more problems. And so your corporation gets bigger, you have more people, and so there's more of a need to like focus on profits or whatever. So that, like, it's all retch, no vomit. It's like Carcetti in The Wire, bringing it back to media
I
here.
we're like bad because like I literally like just I thought of Carcetti too. Like
Yeah.
you and I have a problem. We have
No, that's a good problem. But like, that's his whole thing, right? He's like, I have to win the governorship election, or else I can't help Baltimore. So he fucks up the schools and the police and all that kind of stuff. And then once he's governor, it's implied it's just going to keep going, right? I have to become president, or else I can't help Maryland, and so I'm going to fuck up Maryland and all that stuff. So that's the whole problem of like chasing that part of it. Is it's never gonna you're never gonna have a day where you don't have a problem you have to solve through more money or more politics or whatever.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Carcetti because rewatching the show, well, like whenever, like when I first watched the show, I remember thinking that like I always thought his like arc was boring, like oh yeah, Carcetti, whatever. But rewatching it on subsequent rewatches, I actually think his arc is one of the best because
Oh
of
yeah.
how understated it is. He starts off as his councilman, making all these promises that you genuinely believe he does want to put forth. He does want to help the people of Baltimore, but like you said, well, in order to do this, I have to make compromises to get into a position where I can then, help the people.
Yeah.
But then it becomes, well, if I do these things, then it's going to put my reelection at risk. So I still have to play ball to get reelected. But then he gets reelected, and then all of a sudden he doesn't have the funds. Oh, well, if I was, like you said, if I was governor, I would have the funds, but now I have to make even more compromises. And by the end, and it all happens so subtly. There's no like big moment where he changes, but subtly, slowly, and surely, it gets to a point where like you kind of don't even know what he believes. It's just he's fighting for something,
He's fighting for
or
himself.
he in a way, and maybe even in his head, he does think, "Oh no, I'm fighting for myself so I can do good." But if you're actively hurting the causes you claim to preach for, are you actually doing a service, or are you doing a disservice?
No, Carcetti, I think, is, you're right, one of the most important characters on the show, because without him, um, we would get the picture that like all politicians are corrupt and evil, and that's why Baltimore and the system is failing. But with Carcetti, since we follow him from the very beginning and we see his like behind closed doors how he's like, we realize that no, the politicians are not just corrupt. I mean, some of them are, sure, and some of them are evil, sure, but it's not just an issue of we've got evil people in office, and if we could just get rid of them, everything would be fine again. That's too simple of an answer for The Wire. We see that it's the systems themselves that are pushing this forward. Just like, the game, right? Between the drug dealers, the cops, the politicians, at the end of the day, the system is pushing them all towards these extremes, and that's what causes these systemic issues throughout the city. Have you ever seen CGP Gray's video, "Rules for Rulers"?
I have not, no.
Okay, it's a really good video. You should check it out. I love that channel. He makes those like kind of short animated educational videos, but he talks in that video about how like why leaders make the decisions that they make. It's because they have to stay in power in order to enact any kind of change that they want. If you're not in power, you can't enact change. But in order to stay in power, you have to make compromises, you have to bribe these people, you have to do whatever. So fundamentally, the way that power works, you cannot be like a pure for the people type of person, because you will lose to the person who is willing to do those bad things. So you have to be willing to do them too. I think it's a great video for anyone who's interested in like understanding, like, again, those systemic issues that cause people to behave the way they do. It's just it's just the game, right? As they say in the show.
Yeah, and kinda going back, it's like when we're talking about, like, do corporations have ideologies? No. Well, it's actually funny. I don't think the corporations have ideologies. I think the people within that corporation usually have ideologies. Now, of course, like we say, like if a corporation's made up of like millions of like God knows how many people, thousands of people, you're gonna have a lot of diversity of ideology. However, as you point out, in certain industries, so for example, in say, media like film or like television, you're probably gonna get a share of people who are more liberal minded just because that's usually like studies have shown people who tend to be more liberal minded tend to be attracted to those sort of positions, creativity, media, movies, and whatnot. And so when these people say, hey, we want to promote diversity, we want to, Black Lives Matter, support pride, I believe them. I do think that in their head and their hearts, they're doing so for what they believe is right. However, there's two things. One, going back to the whole thing of can you ever do something that is really selfless? So if you're trying to promote diversity in a certain industry or like in movies or TV or whatever, you might genuinely want to do that. However, if it also seems like it might benefit your profile or your company, are you really only doing it selflessly, or are you doing it because maybe it might help you down the road or make you look good? And again, I'm not saying that these people are like selfish bastards for that. I think it's hard. How do you sparse out that? How can you tell how much how much of your intention is driven by one or the other? And I don't think there really is a way to tell.
And that brings up an interesting question, which is how much does it matter specifically for companies, right? Of how much, like, would you continue to consume their product no matter what their ideology is? Do you only judge it based on the product that they're giving and the value you're getting from it, or do you let whatever politics they have affect you? There are people who will not eat at Chick-fil-A because they are a Christian organization, and they support those types of values. They're not very supportive of LGBTQ whatever stuff because of their Christian ideology. I wouldn't say they might not necessarily be like actively trying to hurt those people, but they're not they're just not going to support that kind of stuff because of that's who the owners are. It's a private company, all that kind of stuff. Conversely, there's people who are like, I'll never watch Marvel anymore. I'll never watch Disney, whatever, because they're pushing a liberal, whatever ideology. They're pushing diversity. They're pushing all this stuff. So, um, I guess it comes down to a personal decision. I mean, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, but like, how much do you let an ideology affect, whether you continue to use a business's services or not?
Hmm. Well, it kind of goes back to the idea of I did a video on this a while back on Death of the Author. I did a profile on Elia Kazan, who was acclaimed film director on the
Yeah.
Waterfront Streetcar. But during HUAC, he rat a lot of people out. And then in the '90s, he was being given oh no, I think it was 2000. No, it was the '90s. He was being given an honorary Oscar, and a lot of people were upset about it. Um, so yeah, so the question is like, well, should we be acclaiming? Can we still consume these movies? Can we still enjoy these movies? Or do we have to like, or is it, should we not do that because the director is not a good person? Same thing with corporations is, it's like, hey, if this corporation is doing something we don't like in the background, should we, is it hypocritical of you to still engage with their content or buy their product, etc. I think my general feeling on it is that because it kind of gets into the area of like, oh, you're for socialist policies but you own an iPhone. It's this idea that if you can't be against something if you engage in it, which I don't really like. I really hate that because especially like in our society, there are certain things that we can critique, but we still have to engage. Like I can complain. It's like, hey, our public transit system is bad. It's like, it's not good. It's run poorly. It costs too much. And then people say it's like, well, you still ride it. You still utilize it. It's like, well, yeah, because I have to get to work. It would cause such a ridiculous inconvenience for me to not use it. But this idea that because of that we can't make things better, I think that sort of mentality leads to people. I think that sort of mentality just leads to nothing getting better ever, and I don't
Yeah,
like that.
I so people do that a lot, especially in like the video game community. They're like, "Well, vote with your wallet." Like just stop complaining. If you don't like the game, stop paying for whatever. And I understand that that's true, right? That like not choosing to not purchase a product is the way that you influence a company the most because they live and die by their profits. But I also think it's stupid to say that like you should never complain because complaining is how you get across to these people that what the specific thing that's bothering you is. Now, of course, there are some complaints, right, that are never going to get answered, right? You can complain all day long about Apple being, having their custom software and their custom solutions, and you'd wish that they used the more general like USB things or whatever. But that's never going to happen because it's part of Apple's whole design philosophy is to have their own systems and kind of force you to stay in their ecosystem. um, and that's personally why I don't use Apple. I don't like that about it, and I don't think it's consumer friendly for my needs. And so I make the decision that for me, it's not a company I'm going to support. Um, for other people, they might say that it's like, hey, it's these features are super convenient to me, and so even though I don't like these other things about the company, I'm still going to continue to use their products. And that's a personal decision that all of us have to make in terms of ourselves. But um, it Yeah, I guess I just say it's personal, and we each have to make our own value decision. You can't fight every single battle in the world, right? You have to pick and choose, where to spend your energy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because kind of bring it back to I think you brought up Disney and Marvel, and because they're pushing liberal propaganda. What's so funny about that is that I well, on one hand, it's like because there have been times when companies have gone forward with certain products, like I think like the female Ghostbusters, a couple other examples, but that's like a big one, where there was a very loud outcry against it. There was a very um, I mean, obviously, like there were the people who were just being like cringe lords about it, like you're
Hmm.
ruining my childhood,
Yeah.
like those people. I was like, just relax. Um, but most people, like even normal people, like probably you and me, were kind of both like, this is kind of cringe. Like it's like it's not ruining my childhood, but like it does kind of seem like you're trying a little bit too hard, or rather I should say you're not putting enough effort into really trying hard for the diversity that you claim to want to take credit for. So I'm probably like I think I did see the movie, but not in theaters. Um, and but then even after the film bombed hard, you would still see them and these companies make films like that. So the question is that if these companies know that this sort of stuff gets, because I feel like even today, like most people don't watch Marvel for that sort of stuff, for like that sort of like, quote unquote ideology. Like most fans don't really care whether it's in it or not. However, it does cause a lot of furor for that section of the fan base that gets like really pissed off about it. So you would think if what it was all about was profit, that they would stop because, like, hey, we don't want to alienate this, even if it's a smaller group, we don't want to alienate them. However, then the question is, what if there is a facet of this where the outrage is in is sort of in the best interest of the company.
Oh,
It's
it
like, hey,
absolutely is.
yeah, it's like, hey, we put this in this sort of like ideological stuff in this show or this movie, and we believe it. And yeah, is it gonna piss people off? Yeah, but those people, they watch the movie, they don't stop talking about it, they create a lot of buzz, even if there's no such thing as negative press or bad publicity or whatever. Um, yeah, so you have to ask yourself, at what point is it sort of like you know, kicking the hornet's nest for their own profit.
Oh, it absolutely is. And we talked about this before, which is that like in the age that we live in with the internet and like the oversaturation of information, right? You have to be extreme in order to cut through the noise. If you just make an okay movie that no one's pissed off about, it'll probably fail because no one's talking about it, no one's pissed off about it. You get more from like baiting both sides to argue about it and to talk about it and go see it, even if it's out of hate. The female Ghostbusters movie in particular was a misfire. I think they were expecting more people to go see it out of hate than did. A lot of people just chose not to see it. It's interesting too because um, I don't know if you know James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd.
Hmm.
He got a lot of controversy because he just said he wasn't going to go see the movie. He didn't say like I hate the movie. He didn't say I hate the politics. He didn't say blah blah blah. He's just like, to me this is not Ghostbusters, and I'm just not going to review it. And that pissed a lot of people off. And I think one of the reasons they focus so much on him, not just because he's famous or whatever, and they can attack him or whatever, but um, that notion that's like, oh, I'm just not going to see it, was antithetical to um, the whole notion that like we're gonna benefit from your hate views. If the indifference was worse to them than anger or outrage, and so you're right. A lot of this stuff comes. I know we talked about it before. It comes from a genuine place of wanting to support these ideas, two, chasing trends because other shows and other movies are pushing these things, so we need to do it too. And then three, again, trying to get those, rage views, those hate views in order to generate controversy, in order to get your thing in front of more eyes and make more money.
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned that because that's sort of like my opinion on it. Like like when the Ghostbusters thing was going on, my intention was, hey, well, what really like pissed me off about that movie was that how do you have a movie with Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Leslie Jones, and Kate McKinnon, like it's probably like four of the funniest actresses working today, and make it just like the most unfunny movie. Like when I eventually saw it, I was like, like they didn't play to their strengths. It was just really, it wasn't a bad movie because of diversity. It was a bad movie because it was a bad movie.
Yeah.
Um, the but when it comes to like stuff I see nowadays, like like I got a comment or I've gotten comments on like my videos saying like, hey, are you gonna review like Supergirl or Batwoman? And I'm like, no. Why would I do that? And the reason they were asking that is because there is a large audience of people who are watching these shows just to shit on them, like
Yeah.
just to hate on them. And but not even like in like like I've made some videos where it's like, hey, this movie's really bad. Let's like laugh at it and have fun. But this isn't really that. It's more like like anger, like they're destroying um and yet I just don't understand that because and I think you're the same way where like for example like the Cowboy Bebop Netflix show.
Yeah.
People again were like, "Hey, you're going to make a video on that." I'm like, No, because I don't care about it." Like
Yeah.
after I heard that it wasn't very good and again like, watch it for yourself. It's like but for the most part it seems like the consensus is it's not very good.
Yeah.
Like it's not like not because it's like woke, but just because it's just not very good. Why would I waste my time either like giving them my time, my view hours, um, if it's just not something I'm interested in? And the irony is, like you said, if you trying to like, speak with your dollar, if you will, and you still go and watch these shows and talk about them and give like waste your breath on them, you're not you're actually fighting against what you say you should do.
Yeah. I really don't. I'm not a fan of like these negative kind of videos. I understand why they're popular. I understand that like it's much easier, I think, to make something kind of shit on something, to make a video about like, hey, here's why this series is bad. Here's why this movie is bad. There's a whole genre right on YouTube of content creators who are like, here's why this thing is bad, and you should think it's bad. But for me, and like you just said, it's not fun for me to do that at all. I would much rather make something talking about something I love, talking about The Sopranos, talking about The Wire, talking about something that's great. That to me is much more rewarding and fun. And I've made some videos on stuff I thought was terrible, but I just think that like negative attitude in general, I understand why it's popular and I understand why people do it, but for me it's almost like toxic mindset. It's not fun, and I think it leads to. I think we talked about this before, but if that's kind of your whole personality is just shitting on something and not liking stuff, it tends to lead to this very negative mindset where you think everything is shit, you think everything is horrible, and I think for me that's just not the kind of content that I want to make.
Or even if like when you mentioned like I have made stuff on stuff I don't like, a lot of my content is like talking about stuff that isn't very good, and like we have fun with it. Like this is crap. However, the we always try to find some sort of positive spin. What can we? This is bad, but what can we learn from it? And at the very least, I like that you're focusing
Yeah.
on something positive, a lesson.
Yeah.
How, but yeah, then there's like a lot of content that's just this is bad. Look at all the bad stuff in it. And again, it might be bad, but if it's really that bad and there's no there's no benefit from discussing it. Like there's no
Yeah.
like lesson to be learned. What 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 is the net positive that you're getting from this experience? Like I can't do that because it's exhausting. Like
Mhm.
if I watch like all this shit about just crapping on movies or like I don't know if I told you I had planned to do a Star Wars sequel trilogy rewrite
Mhm.
because I thought that like, hey, this is actually a good example of something we can look at, objectively, see where it went wrong, and sort of like learn from it, learn from its mistakes. But since then, the community, or I don't know if the community, but there has been so much. There's even today, there's so much just vitriol thrown at it that I just don't even want to bother. I just don't even want to. And I'm not saying all, but like there's a lot of people still discussing it who don't like the sequel trilogy, who I just don't want anywhere near my channel.
No, I think your rewrite series is a great example of like we can acknowledge that something is bad, but it's coming from like a positive mindset of like here's how it could be better, here's the lessons we could learn. Another great example I think for both of us is the Many Saints of Newark, right? We
Hmm.
both were not happy with that movie, but we're still fans of the franchise, the Sopranos franchise. For me, I was in a weird spot when that movie came out because I wanted to love it. My whole channel was dedicated to loving The Sopranos, and it felt weird for me to shit on something that was so dear to my heart. And so I couldn't make a. I did a review, like a general review, but then I also did a rewrite of the movie where I was like, "Here's how I would rewrite the Many Saints to not fundamentally change it." Like there are a lot of people who are like, "Just get rid of the black people." Like, no, I don't think that's the right answer. I think this was important to David Chase to tell this specific story, but you could incorporate it more into like the Sopranos lore. You could incorporate it more into Dickie's relationship with Tony and run the theme throughout the movie constantly. Versus it felt more like two stories that they just kind of jammed together, which is actually what happened. David Chase wanted to make a movie about the Newark riots with no connection to the Sopranos. Studio wouldn't fund it, so he added the kind of Sopranos elements to it, and I think that's why for many fans there's that disconnect there. But fundamentally, that video is about my love of The Sopranos. It's about positivity and how I think the movie could be good with just some slight changes there. And I think we're both, we're both more about the positivity than just the word you said, vitriol. I think is a very good word. It's like that encompasses how that toxic negativity that a lot of people have for these different franchises, different shows that I think bleeds into not just your objective reading of the show, but it just bleeds into your mindset and how you kind of look at the world. And I agree with you. That's not something I want to do or have anywhere near my channel at all.
And I think also, even if we did, and again, again, you're right. I think that we both came from a place of like, yeah, where we kind of wish this was better, but let's talk about like what, not the positives of it, but like what can we get from its failure. I think that's always a good framing. Um, but also, even if we were just crapping on it, like, again, like I have a couple videos on my channel about that. The point is that when we do that, we say it and then we walk away and
Yeah.
we leave it. It's like that's even part of the reason why I'm still having trouble working on the Game of Thrones rewrite finale where I put it
Yeah.
all together, because I really feel like, cause, and I still get questions like, "Hey, are you still gonna make any Game of Thrones videos?" And I'm like, "No," because I really feel like I've said all I have to say. It's very weird to me, and in defense, I don't see this. It's weird to me if I still see someone like making videos on how bad Game of Thrones was.
Yeah.
Like that would be kind of weird for me. It's like I feel like we've literally everything that you could possibly say about that series has been said,
Yeah.
and maybe we should move on. But when
Well,
it comes to say Star Wars, I'm a little like, there's still new shows, but like
yeah.
people still are like talking about the sequel trilogy, and I'm like, whoa, okay, man, it's been like a long time.
Well, this also comes down to like we both, I think, are like concerned with beating a dead horse. We don't want to make a video that someone like a million other people have made. We might do something similar, or we might cover the same topics, but we always want to put a fresh spin on it, our spin on it. And for something like Game of Thrones, right? Everyone and their mothers has shit on the ending. So there's no real point in just making a video that's like, yeah, Game of Thrones is bad, because everyone has said that. But your rewrite series, you're adding something new to it. You're like, here's how I would change it. Here's how I would incorporate those elements. And that's something that a lot of people who are just shitting on it would never even think to do. They would never even think to be like, how could it be better? They're just like, it was bad, and you should feel bad for it being bad. But I think that, when a new show comes out, that might be an inspiration to you too. That when new media comes out about it, that might reinvigorate you, because it gives you like a fresh lens to look at it through. For The Sopranos, I felt the same way, right? Like I had said almost everything I wanted to say about The Sopranos, and when I was done with that series, I was like, I don't really want to make videos on this for a little while. I wanted to, just put it to the side, and I'll work on some other stuff. And then, you know, something comes along one day where I'm like, hey, I want to revisit this. I just released a video last week, going through all the things I'd left out of my Sopranologue series. It was a lot of fun for the viewers, but enough time had passed where I was like, oh, okay, this is fresh again. This is new for me. I'm not just beating a dead horse with these Soprano videos. This feels genuine, which that's the theme we've been dancing around this whole episode. Is like everything we do has to come from a genuine place of interest, not just for profit, not just for views, not just for whatever. Otherwise, it feels fake and it pisses people off.
Yeah, and I think that's and to kind of tie it to back to sort of like media and talking about like forced diversity or just like promoting diversity. Um, it's difficult because on one hand, I agree, like you and I agree, when like Ghostbusters 2016 came out, we could kind of tell that like it doesn't really feel like it kind of doesn't really feel like you're like if you're just promoting, it's like, hey, we have this cool idea for like a female spinoff and it's a new original angle, like that would be one, like there'd still be people pissed off about it, but like for me, like I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
The issue there was that it really just felt like you were giving the bare minimum and expecting everyone to like I wasn't mad at it because of the diversity. It's that you're giving so little effort to the stated goals of diversity, and then you're expecting us to like bow down and be like, thank you so much for this product. That's what pissed me off. However, I guess my worry is that now people, or not everyone, but like a good chunk of the online discourse, they see any sort of diversity and they kind of have this knee jerk reaction that like, oh, the only reason they want a black Ariel or a black James Bond is because they're trying to push this ideology, um, or because they're doing it because they're trying to angle it to get money or to like pat themselves in the back. And on one hand, I can understand the um, again, given the multiple instances of this happening, I understand the hesitance. But what ends up happening is it kind of I think it almost has the opposite effect where people try to do something interesting, like inject real quality diversity or representation, but a lot of people kind of poo poo it right out of the gate. And that's something that I don't like seeing.
Well, it's like we said before. Like, is profit part of that equation when they're deciding to do this stuff? Absolutely, because it's a company and they need to make money. It doesn't mean that the product still can't be good, even though it's incorporating these things into it. But I think another problem is this is a lot of these issues are like tied together, where it's like it's hard to separate the two of them when we're talking about it. I think you talked a lot about when people are critiquing this stuff, sometimes they say it the wrong way. They're mad about this thing, but the focus ends up being on this thing. And I think another thing people are really mad about is the constant need to like reboot series and reboot, all of this stuff. Take the female Ghostbusters, for example. Would people have been less pissed off if they had just made it like this is a team of female scientists that has nothing to do with Ghostbusters. This is a new IP that we're making. A lot of people wouldn't have been as offended. Now, the reason they did that, of course, is because Ghostbusters is an existing IP. They can make more money, selling it to existing fans. It's a safer bet to them. And this is a much larger problem of Hollywood being like creatively bankrupt and constantly just going back to the well of rebooting series. Um, some people are, of course, pissed off that it's female Ghostbusters, not just that they're rebooting it. Some people are pissed off that they're rebooting it. Other people are pissed off that they're booting it with women. And a lot of that discourse gets mixed together, and it's like, no, I'm just mad about them going back to the well with this. But now my criticism is tied in with all of these incels who are mad about any kind of women in film at all. So it's a tough issue to unpack when you're looking at the whole picture.
Exactly. Like, even like kind of going back to our previous discussion on James Bond, I don't think that a female James Bond would work. But it's not because I think, oh, because you're ruining the sanctity of masculinity and our culture. Like, no, I just think that, like, again, if you try to make a female James Bond, you'd have to change so many fundamentals of the character. Why not just make a new character at that point?
Yeah.
That, and also like what you mentioned, it does kind of seem disingenuous when you're like, for example, like I think Idris Elba should play James Bond simply because I think he's the best person for the role. However, if you're doing it, if people are saying, "Oh, we're doing this because we need diversity and representation," well, at that point, I would just say, well, just hire more POC directors and writers. Like,
Yeah.
stop like beating around it. Like, you're kind of, and same thing with Ghostbusters. It's not that like I have a problem with female Ghostbusters. I have a problem with you thinking you're like, we're promoting diversity and representation and then doing the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to write rules for these like talented women. You're just going to take an IP, slap a gimmick on it, and then call it a day. That's what pisses me off.
Yeah.
But you're right. Sometimes I am a bit hesitant voicing those concerns because then if I say, hey, I don't think James Bond should be a woman, then I get all these people who are like, yeah, man, the fucking feminists are destroying our hobbies. And it's like, okay, no, not you. Please
Yeah.
leave. Not you. Get away from me.
It's funny that it reminds me of that South Park episode where they're it's early on in the show, and they're the South Park flag is a bunch of white guys hanging a black guy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's Jimbo doesn't want the flag changed out of history. He's like, this is a historical flag, we shouldn't change it. And then all the KKK come and we're like, yeah, we're supporting you. And he's like, no, 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 we don't want your support. We don't want what you want. We're just like historical people, and it's pretty funny to see that. I saw the same thing with I didn't click on the article, so I might be talking out of my ass, but I just saw an article that said that like Vladimir Putin supports J.K. Rowling and
I
her
saw that. Yeah.
anti-trans stuff, and I'm like, I'm 100% sure she does not want you supporting her right now. You're just making it worse for her.
Well, I think there is something to be said of, and I think it's a good instinct to have. That isn't to say that like two people can believe the same things for completely different reasons.
Yeah,
Like, I don't think that there should be a female James Bond because of the fundamentals of the character. You don't think there should be a female James Bond because something feminism is taking over Western culture, whatever. I don't want to be. We might agree on something, but for completely different reasons. However, there does come a time when you have to ask yourself, hang on, if I do believe X, Y, and Z, and all these other people that I really, really dislike believe in XYZ, it doesn't mean you have to not believe XYZ, but maybe just sort of reconsider, like you just kind of like examine what it is that you're doing. Like, like that episode, like with Jimbo, it kind of allowed him to sort of like, when he saw the KKK was also for the flag, he was like, huh, maybe I should reconsider my opinion. Not like completely change it at the drop of a whim, but just reconsider, like try to see the full picture, not just get too honed in on one's viewpoint.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up too because it also works the opposite way too. With like, Chef is he's black and he's so offended by the flag, and then at the end he realizes that the kids, right, they didn't even see they didn't even see color in the flag. They're just like they thought it was just an issue of like hanging people, and he realized that he was kind of pushing his racial views and everything onto this issue too. And in the end, they settle with a compromise where it's like a bunch of different colored guys hanging a guy, and it's like, so it's a funny episode, but I think it works both ways, right? Of like, we should always be open to re-examining our beliefs and our ideas. You should never be like so married to an idea that you're not open to hearing anyone else's side. I think that's one of the problems of the society we live in today, is that, I mean, I guess it's been a problem forever, but like ideologies become part of ourselves, and so we view any kind of attack on the ideology or whatever as an attack on ourselves. Any kind of challenge to our viewpoint as a diminishment of our own, who we are as a person. I think that's a bad place to be, because it just it makes it so there can be no discussion, there can be no compromise, there can be no change, and I think we're all better as a society when we're open and talking with each other and working together to reach a consensus.
I have to say, as much as and again, you and I agree, and I don't mean to put anyone down who's like very, well, I'd say we're both very passionate about media and storytelling. However, there is it seemed like a large subset of people online who, kind of like you were saying, they kind of take it a little bit too far, where the things they like, they make it a part of their
Oh yeah.
personality. Where there are plenty of like movies and TV shows, like if someone says to me, hey, I don't think The Sopranos is very good, X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z, I might defend against it, I might push back, but it's not going to. But me liking The Sopranos, I don't really consider a portion of my my personality, like my who I am. It's just something that I like. Same thing with, like, I like pizza. If someone said I don't like pizza, I'm like, I'm not going to take it as an affront. Um, but I see, and I think that is like one of the big issues with a lot of online discourse, is like you said, like, if when people start to like argue or disagree over the quality of a show, it becomes like this very personal, very vitriolic thing very quickly. Like, oh, you like Marvel, I know everything I need to know about you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're okay with wokeness in media, I know everything I need. Or you don't want a female James Bond, I know everything I need to know about you. And that's, to me, I think that is so weird.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like unhinged. Like, you need to like get that checked.
It's weird for us as content creators because unlike most people, we're actually putting something out there that's a reflection of ourselves. But people need to understand it's only one part of ourselves, right? When we make a video essay talking about whatever, yeah, you're gonna see some of your politics in there. You're gonna see some of my politics. You're gonna see whatever, but you don't have a full picture of who I am as a person. And I think that's something that all famous people, quote unquote, it's not that either of us are famous, but that's something that all people realize, is that like, yeah, I might, you watch a movie with a celebrity, right? You'll get some part of him coming through, but you don't see how they're like at home. You don't see how they're like in every individual situation, and it's not fair to them, and it's not really fair to you to think that this person over this kind of stuff. But again, we kind of, we're in an age where we want to judge people based off a tweet. We want to judge people based off of whatever, but that's, people are more complex than that. Just think about yourself. Would you want to be judged based off one interaction? No, because people are very different in different situations. They change over time, and people are just not that simple, no matter how much we want to believe them to be so basically, what I'm saying is, don't judge me, you and me specifically.
Yeah, right.
We don't want that here.
Or just kind of like, to wrap up, it goes back. It's both sides of the equation, where it's like, because I've heard, a lot of people argue, well, um, like the female Ghostbusters, it's or Star Wars, it's ruining my childhood. And it's like, okay, you can be against it, you can critique it, but if it's really having like that much of a personal effect on you, I think like again, you need to reassess like your life. And then I've also heard people say, well, if you critique something, so like say, I got this a lot on my Last of Us 2 video. Why can't you just let people enjoy things? Why do you insist on making people feel guilty for liking a thing that's bad? And I'm like, if one of us critiquing something makes you feel guilty or bad about liking it, again, you need to reassess whatever you're doing in your life. That is a very unhinged weird thing for you to feel.
Yeah, I mean, I this is probably getting us into a separate topic that we'll save for another video, but there is a genre of video that's like that where it's like you should feel bad for liking this thing. It goes both ways, right? If you like this thing, you're a liberal, sissy, whatever. Or if you like this thing, you're a problematic, whatever, blah blah blah. There is a genre that's like that, that's trying to push it, and I hate that type of content. But I think you and me both agree that like we are people out of our content. Like, it doesn't the Sopranos doesn't define me, the whatever doesn't define me. um we have it's like self-esteem, it's and a lot of people don't have it, and that's why we get into so many. If more people had self-esteem, we would be in a better spot in the world, because people would not be so defensive, they would not be so angry all the time, and we get a lot more done.
They aren't defining themselves based on these things, so you can critique them without it coming off as a personal attack.
Exactly. We've reached our hour here, and we're gonna send things off. But any final thoughts for the podcast you want to leave us on here?
Yeah, I think we kind of like delved into went from corporations to media, which like makes sense for us. Like
Yeah,
that's sort of our thing. But yeah, I think just to wrap up, we kind of went over everything. But yeah, what I don't well actually to a good wrap up thought, my and it kind of goes back to what were the first thing we talked about. A friend of mine, little bookworm in my Discord, she actually brought up a good point where we were talking about the black girl who's playing Ariel in the upcoming Little Mermaid um, adaptation, and we kind of were talking about, hey, is the company doing this because they're just trying to like push diversity? Are they doing it just to like, suck their own dick? Are they doing it because they really are genuinely think she's the best for the role, whatever, whatever? And book, she asked me, and it's like, and it was a good point. She was like, well, what does it matter if at the end of the day this does have an effect? If this does lead to say, hey, little black girls, they see a black arrow, like hell yeah. Or if if it's a bad movie, it's a bad movie, but it could have been a bad movie either way. Like there are plenty of faithful adaptations that are terrible. um it are Should we like really like focus so much on like the intentions of the corporation, or like bring it back, the quote unquote ideology of the corporation, or just view everything through a pro con basis? And I kind of think that that's usually the best policy.
I think it is for everything. It's just, you make your own value decisions, support what you want, but don't let it define you, and don't let it be to a point where you can't be open to hearing every side of the argument.
Hmm.
I think it's a great place for us to leave it on here. So thank you guys so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode of No One's a Critic, coming soon.
Take care, y'all.